chat here so I can see what people are saying. Alright, hey everybody. Let me know how the audio is, how the picture is. I'm still pretty new to streaming, so be patient with me. Can everyone hear me okay? Looks like everything's running smoothly. Let me make sure everyone on social media knows what we're doing. Welcome, welcome. I'm just going to be working on this painting today. As you can see, I just already put down just a kind of initial layer of like thin yellow paint to kind of give it a warm glow. Hiya. We have our first cameo of a small puppy and the husband. This is Kitsu. And that's Matt back there. We have a few people watching, but no one in chat yet. But the puppy will return, I'm sure. Let's see. Hello, hello. Oh, sweet. Hello to the 9, 6, and 3-year-olds. It's just gonna be a pretty chill afternoon. I'm just gonna be working on this painting. Hello, Bill. How's it going? Like I said, as you can see, I've already put an initial layer of paint on this painting. Just kind of a thin yellow wash. It's gonna be kind of a warm, springtimey painting. So the light is warm, so the underwash needs to be warm. And it also kind of helps give it an old-fashioned kind of vellum feel. Normally when I paint, I'm working on a watercolor block, which means that the sides of the paper are glued down so that as you put on water, the paper doesn't fold and buckle. This is a bit of like scrap watercolor paper that I needed to use up. And the plan was to use painter's tape to tape it down while I painted. I didn't realize until after I'd already completely finished inking the drawing yesterday that I don't have painter's tape. So if you could see, I've got books weighing down the edge of it so that it doesn't buckle too much. And then I'll have to go back in with a little press and flatten it once the painting is done. But we're kind of just rigging it however we can. Let me know if at any point if the audio is weird or if the music's too loud or if I'm too loud. The video's okay, but otherwise we're gonna get started. Let me mix up some colors here. If you want to see, this is my painting setup. We got a water well here, palette, brushes. There's you guys. My hair's kind of fluffy because I just got out of the shower and I haven't really fixed it or anything. So for this painting, I'm wanting kind of like a sun-dappled effect. Let's get a good look at the painting so you guys know where we're going. So normally when I do watercolor paintings, I start by doing warm and light tones to dark and cold tones. It's just the way watercolor mixes. It's the way it kind of layers best. For this, I want to do a sun-dappled effect, so sort of sunlight kind of spottily coming through the trees, which is not really a lighting effect I've done before. So I'm gonna, just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna go ahead and do the kind of overall shadows first, And then I'm going to clean out my water well and then kind of do my usual warm to cold, light to dark. If at any time you guys have questions, just let me know, drop them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on it, so I'll answer them as best I can. Mix up some cool shadows here. I don't want to get too crazy. Alright. Let's start with the important bits. A little bit darker. Let's see how this works. I'm going to try to keep you guys kind of close to the action if I can, so there's going to be some adjustments to the frame throughout, so bear with me. As you can see on the smaller camera, my tripod is not super large. Like I said, this is just kind of, I'm painting in the shadows from the trees. This isn't going to be like the complete shading. And this isn't even like the local colors of each individual object. This is just so I kind of know what I'm doing. And in fact, I'm probably not going to do too much on the trees themselves right now. This is just kind of where I want the focal objects to hit. So on the statue here, on the girl, and on the ground are kind of where the sun dappled effect's going to be, and on these little like pillars. And then I'll kind of just go ahead and switch to my usual method of working. And again, if you guys have questions, it can be about artwork, it can be about my books, it can be about whatever. Just whatever you guys want to talk about. This is just kind of a chill afternoon working stream. Just a reason to hang out. I know a lot of people are kind of home right now, so I'll give them something kind of low stakes and relaxing to watch, I guess. How loose I'm kind of keeping it right now. I'm basically just sketching in the shadows of the trees. We'll kind of come back and tighten these up later. But this is just so we kind of hit the main points and I kind of know where to keep the light strong and the shadows strong. If I go kind of quiet for a bit, I'll try to keep a dialogue going on what I'm doing and kind of the thought process, but a lot of the reason I like doing watercolor is, and especially also the pen and ink work that kind of precedes it, is it's very sort of quiet and meditative for me. And so I do sometimes have a tendency to kind of zone out. So if I go quiet for a bit, don't worry about it. You can feel free to continue to ask questions and I'll kind of wake back up. But I do sometimes kind of go into a zen place and then forget what I'm doing. It's a little darker. Here. I'll try to have the camera kind of keep up with where I'm working so you guys can kind of see what's going on. I'm trying to keep this pretty loose and impressionistic at this stage, and even later on, if it's not the focal point of the characters like the statue and the girl, I want to keep the paint strokes pretty loose to kind of mimic how the eye focuses in on an object. It's an effect I really like in classical painting, and I try to kind of imitate it with my watercolor work. Yeah, zoning out's great during art. That's kind of what it's good for, I feel like. It's just kind of relaxing. Or it should be, anyway. Sometimes when you're under a deadline, it's not. But this particular painting isn't for a deadline. It's not really for a client. When you work in publishing like I do, I make, for those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I make graphic novels. I write and illustrate graphic novels for a living. And if you work in books and you work in publishing, you know that publishing involves a lot of waiting, kind of interspersed with big flurries of deadline work. And so for the current book I'm working on, which hasn't been announced yet, so I can't really talk details on it. I've finished writing it, and I finished storyboarding it, and so now it's with my editor to be reviewed. To get back editorial notes, but you know, editors have a lot of other projects they're working on and a lot of other authors and other books they're reviewing, and it can sometimes take them some time, especially when there's like disruptions like there are now. And so when you're working publishing, there's a lot of times where you're just kind of sitting on your hands. It's nice because you kind of have this built-in vacation time, but if you're like me, I get sort of restless creatively, and I start to, I'm going to do something on one side here. I start to kind of get the itch to make something again. And so in this little break, while I've been waiting for editorial notes, I've worked on a couple short comics, one of which is out and available online. It's called The Goblin. The other one I'm still kind of working on. And then it kind of gives me a chance to do stuff like this, where I'm just kind of working on paintings just to explore visual ideas I find interesting and practice my technique and experiment with new techniques. Just kind of use the time to be a better artist. So on the flat surfaces, you can kind of see the sort of sun-dappled effect that I'm going for here. That'll kind of pop out more as we go along and add color. So that's done, at least for now. Let's do our usual process. I'm actually gonna fully just get a new water well for warm tones. Ooh, full of dog hair. I hope everyone's got some good snacks handy. I've got some trail mix here that I will be snacking on. I'm going to put these over here. All right. Hello, new people joining. We're just kind of getting underway here. Again, feel free to ask questions and chat. I'll try to keep on as best as I can. Stacey says, I love your Estranged series. The watercolors fit so well with the story and especially the character design. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. For those who don't know, Estranged is my series of graphic novels. It's a sort of urban fantasy story. There's 2 books in the series so far. They're watercolor just like this, and I appreciate that you like them. I'm always so happy to hear that people enjoy the work. While I'm waiting for the shadows to dry before I start working in on warm tones, for a little bit of context on this piece, I talked a little bit about it on the live stream I did yesterday while I was inking, but there's a lot of new folks on here for this one, so I'll talk about this one a little bit. Like I said, this isn't really for anything in particular. There's no story associated as of now. There might be in the future. That's how a lot of my story ideas come about. It's just doing standalone paintings or sketches like these. Stories kind of emerge from them that later turn into books. But one thing that really fascinates me is sort of places of power in comics. Not in comics, sorry, in mythology. Well, places of power in mythology. So like sites of worship, things like that, or sites of superstition. And I'm fascinated by the way that translates into a modern context. You'd think that places where people go to, gain luck or beseech a supernatural entity, that doesn't happen as much outside of like a formalized religious context. But you'd kind of be surprised. I feel like a lot of small towns, like where I grew up, there's definitely like, a tree at a certain part in the woods where people go and like tie little rags to the tree for luck, or, wishing wells or things like that. So I'm fascinated by that concept. I also love trickster figures in myths and folklore, and so I kind of wanted to create this piece of, a more modern context of, a local teenager going to the site of what was maybe once a trickster deity to ask for help. And so you kind of have fox statue, and then you have down here like the different offerings that like teenagers have brought it over time for luck or for assistance or, to help with an exam, stuff like that. She's offering it a beloved childhood book. Whether or not it is actually a trickster deity or has power, I don't think is as important to the story. I think it's kind of an interesting question and a good mystery. But that's kind of the themes I'm trying to explore with this. It's concepts I find fascinating and visuals I like. I've also been doing a lot of character work. If you follow me on social media, I've been doing a lot of character designs lately, and so I wanted something that was more environment focused than character focused. And so that's why this looks the way it does, where it's like very sort of setting specific. Just trying out different things, keeping skills sharp, stuff like that. Jake asks, are watercolors a viable medium for a solo comic project? Well, that's how I do my comics. I've done 2 full graphic novels, and I'm working on a 3rd just with watercolor. Is it viable? It's a good question. It's the only way I really know how to work, so I've sort of made it viable, but it's hard to say whether or not it's the best way to go about it. Just kind of whatever mediums work best for you. Robert says, I can understand a place of power. I live very close to a Native American graveyard. There's a huge oak tree growing in the middle, at least 200 years old. Yeah, so stuff like that. They're a little more prevalent, where you have shrines to local like nature deities in more Eastern cultures. Like Japan has a lot of these kind of in more rural areas. And so it's a little more formalized. In the West, we do still definitely have stuff like them, though. I was, one of my favorite movies is Song of the Sea. It's an Irish film by Tom Moore. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it. It's another movie with a great kind of watercolor style to it. But there's these great little backgrounds in the design that Tom Moore kind of talks about, where apparently in Ireland you have these old kind of pagan sites of these mounds or these wells that had a lot of significance for sort of pre-Christian cultures. And then as Christianity kind of swept through the country, they were sort of adapted and appropriated and sort of converted to Christian sites, but they still kind of retain that sort of superstitious hold. And that kind of stuff is just really interesting to me. So right now I'm mixing up some warm colors. When I work, I tend to like to paint the kind of more important focal bits first, as long as the tone spectrum is where I'm at in the watercolor. And so specifically right now that means the girl. I almost always start with skin tones, because skin tones are usually pretty delicate, and they're kind of the easiest to mess up. And so I like to get the easiest to mess up stuff out of the way at the beginning, so that I can kind of relax and not worry as much for the rest of the piece. And also, if I mess up early on, it's not that big of a deal to scrap it and start over. Hello everybody. I see more folks jumping in. Does it sound still okay? Can everyone hear and see everything and the music's audible? Alright, getting a little crazy on mixing this palette. So you can see how delicate I'm keeping that. It's pretty light touch stuff. I'll get a bit of reference here. Good to hear the sounds doing well. Yeah, we're just listening to like the sort of chill hop station. Would love to see your palette when you have lots of colors on there. Also, I think the music is a smidge loud. Okay, I can turn the music down a little bit. Let me adjust that. There we go. How's that? I can show you the palette now. I have sort of a bad habit where I don't really clean it off between paintings because I use kind of the same palette lately. Here's what it looks like. It's messy. But the water well is here in the middle. And then you have the palettes. As you can see, I kind of keep like warm tones, cool tones, greens. I said at the beginning of the stream, but I'll explain what these books are doing here. Usually I work on a watercolor block where this is glued down so that when I paint it and put layers of water on, it doesn't buckle. But this was a bit of spare watercolor paper I had lying around that I wanted to use up, and I was just going to use painter's tape when I got to the painting bit just to keep it flat. I only realized once the inking was done that I don't have painter's tape here, and so I have these books sort of keeping it flat while I work, and then I'll just press the painting flat when I'm all done. So that's why those are here. All right, let's keep working on this girl. But yeah, a lot of my stories start this way, with just sort of standalone sketches or paintings that kind of over time. Sometimes they just stay like this; they stay standalone, because I just like them sort of as an individual image. But sometimes they kind of suggest bigger worlds, and I kind of feel the need to expand on them. Colors in the background with the shadows and the green of the plant life. So I want her to be kind of more warm tones to help her stand out, and to kind of visually link her with the fox who's on top of the statue. So that kind of thing is important when you're considering a composition of how you can use color to suggest a connection between two different ideas and to kind of help draw the eye. If you work in narrative art, so book illustration or comics, and especially if you work in color, it's good to always kind of be thinking about how color, not just the image itself, can kind of help tell the story. The ways different colors can shift certain moods, or like I was saying, like can connect certain ideas. Slightly deeper red for parts of this book cover. So how's everybody doing today? Everyone's kind of just taking a chill afternoon, I hope. Do you work in any other mediums, or exclusively watercolor on ink? I do. I work in a couple of the mediums. When I'm working on, when I'm illustrating novels that other people have written, so prose work, I usually work just pen and ink. No watercolor. A book I just illustrated came out recently called The Magnificent Monsters of Cedar Street by Lauren Oliver. And it's just black and white line work. And then I haven't done this in any professional capacity yet, but for myself, I sometimes do relief printing. So I'll carve an image into a linoleum block and print it in what's basically kind of a glorified stamp. I've released a few images that way, and I kind of sell those prints at conventions and things. Trying to figure out what to do with my time since I work at a library and we're close to Fernando. Ooh, yeah, I think everyone's in a lot of that situation. But bless you for working at a library. I make frequent use of our local library. I do a lot of my writing there when I'm in writing phases like I am now. A lot of research. When I'm working on paintings, and especially when I'm sort of deep in production on paintings for a graphic novel, I spend a lot of time just rotating through audiobooks checked out from the library. So if you guys don't have a library card to your local library, you should get one. Maybe not right now, but in the near future. All right, let's work on the box. We want just a little bit more yellow than what's on the girl's sweater. Not much, because again, we want them to kind of visually resonate. Let's go for the boxes. It's a little bit too much water on that brush. No, but for the most part, I work in watercolor. It just creates a look that I really like. It kind of helps evoke classic storybook work, which is stuff I admire and I'm clearly very influenced by. It also helps for my comics work because it dries almost instantly, so I can work through a painting pretty fast. Yeah, it's just a medium I enjoy. Let that dry for a second and then do another coat just so that he really pops. But here's how that looks so far. I'm also going to want to do another coat on her because that's like a little dull looking. Let's do that while we're waiting for the fox to dry. Ooh. So the way I work is very similar to how turn of the century children's book illustrators worked, like Arthur Rackham or John Bauer. There were others like Edmund Dulac and Kay Nielsen, whose book I have waiting down one half of this painting, where you just kind of go back in and do layer after layer after layer of really thin translucent watercolor until it gets the tone you want. As you can see, there's a little dog hair in this paint because spring is coming and my dog is shedding. I'm gonna get that out of there. There we go. Thank you so much. It says the fox's head is really nice and everything's got a nice sense of volume. Thank you. I like to kind of evoke texture and volume in my drawings. It kind of helps the viewer kind of put themselves in the place where I'm working, if they can kind of get a sense for how a thing would feel. School just got canceled for me. This is a nice relaxing break from that, so thank you. You're very welcome. Yeah, that was sort of the idea of these streams. I kind of just wanted to share the relaxing thing that I'm doing so that people need it. They have a nice kind of chill afternoon activity. All right, let's do another layer on this fox. These little fine detail fiddly bits go a little slow, and then once they're done and we kind of get on to things that are broader strokes like the trees, and then it's going to start to pick up and we'll switch to a bigger brush. There we go. All right. That's better. Cool. All right. Let me look up some quick reference on a fox's coloring to make sure that I've got these details correct. Okay, so it looks like that we might need a little bit of black later in the fur. Yeah, on the ears at least, and the paws, it looks like. Yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. Just get the fox done. Tommy asks, what tips on drawing trees do you have? So as you can see, there's a lot of trees in this. Doing fairy tale work like I do, those kinds of stories tend to take place, as some of you may have noticed, in forests a lot. And so I draw a lot of trees. A year or two ago, I started to kind of feel I was relying a little bit too much on kind of repetitive shapes, and they just didn't look super convincing, my trees and plants and stuff. And so this last year, actually, I spent a lot of time trying to refine my technique for that. And so what I did is what pretty much any working artist will tell you to do if you want to kind of get better at drawing, I think, from imagination, is to draw it a bunch from life first. In this case, I live fairly close to Prospect Park, which is a park here in Brooklyn, where I live. It's nice because it's a little more foresty than Central Park in Manhattan. It's a little more overgrown, and they haven't really tried to curate it as much. It's this big forest right in the middle of the borough. And so during the spring and summer, I would go several times a week and just do studies of trees in my sketchbook and draw different plant life and kind of get a real feel for what sort of shapes that nature tends to make, what sort of patterns emerge, how they don't emerge, the way that it's chaotic. And I did this enough that I could kind of get a feel for how that works. And I'm still working on it. I still don't think it's perfect, but I'm pretty happy with like the convincing forestness of this, you know? Just kind of getting a feel for how it works. Hello to Lollipop. Surrounding me by a 6-year-old video games rhyme. Her online name is Lollipop. I'm gonna give a shout out. Hello to you, Lollipop. I have not played Rhyme, but I hear it is a great game. And this is kind of, from what I've seen of the visuals, it is sort of Rhyme-esque. She's right. Yeah, but tips for drawing trees, or drawing anything, is to try and find a real-world reference and draw from reference. From life if you can, from photos and stuff online if that's not possible. Just anything to kind of internalize the visual language of it. I didn't look at specific photo reference for these. This is all from imagination, but it's from imagination based on sketches and preparation work and practice that I've done over time. And the graphic novel I'm working on right now, a lot of it takes place out of doors, and so I really wanted to kind of be able to convincingly portray an out of doors area. So Fox and Girl are done. What next? Let's do... What else is warm toned? Let's do some of these little knickknacks here on the slab. Anything that's kind of warm colors kind of needs to be done first. And then we'll shift into greens and then cool tones. So cool tones will be like the shadows and the different stone elements. But right now we're kind of working on this stuff. So this little bowl will be red. I'm kind of just improvising right here. I don't really have a specific color plan for each of these little items. Just anything that kind of makes sure that they are visible and that they're easy to spot. Let's do more of a brown for some of these. So it's done. I'm going to break that cool to warm rule for a second here and just paint the border of this book. would like to know if there's going to be a third Estranged book. So as of right now, there are no official plans for one. The new book I'm working on is a brand new story with brand new characters. So for right now, nothing official. However, I will say, I definitely have notes for where the story could go from here, and it's something that my editor and I have talked about. So if there's enough interest, that's definitely a thing that could happen. So if you would like to see a third Estranged book, make sure to share the series with your friends and talk about it. And the more it gets read, the more my publisher comes and asks me, will you please do another one? So spread the word if you'd like to see more. Does that look like a book? Is that like noticeably a book? I don't know, looks okay. Alright, pull out a little bit here. We're going to start doing some broad strokes. Let's actually pull way back. Switch to a bigger brush. And we'll just kind of go over. Oh, so much pup hair. This is a little bit more of a vibrant green than you guys can see on the stream. The stream's kind of washing it out a little bit. But, when the painting's done, I'll post a scan of it, maybe tomorrow or the next day, once it's like finished. You guys can kind of see what it looks like. Yeah, it's good. That's what I want it to look like. It's sort of an old-fashioned book. The idea here is that it's like an old classic, like beloved book from her childhood. The kind of inner mythology I have built up around the paintings is, you know, that the offerings that the local kids bring this maybe deity, maybe not. It doesn't really matter what they are as long as they are important to the person and it's something they would miss. And so, in this case, she's bringing a beloved book from her childhood. Oof. Robert's talking about bumpy relationships with editors. I have definitely been there. The editor I have worked with through the Estranged books and the editor of several of the books I've illustrated have been wonderful. Very close contact, very good to sort of collaborate, and it's been a really great working relationship. I've definitely been there with bad editors. The first, I won't mention what it is, I will say that the publishing company I did my first ever project for doesn't exist anymore. They had to close because of some bad business practices. So they no longer exist, but the editor was, oof, he was not fun to work with. But, so I'm grateful that I have the people I work with now. And I'm grateful now that I also have my agent, Steven, at Inkwell Management, because he kind of works on my behalf. So I kind of have this buffer, which is really nice to have. I haven't really had to deal with like bad agents or bad editors for a long time now. I've gotten pretty good at kind of picking who I work with. I've been working full-time professionally as an illustrator and as a writer for... I've been doing it professionally for about 5 or 6 years. I've done it full-time as my job for about 4 years. It's been good. So now I'm going to go back once this kind of initial green wash is done and add some variations. If you look at actual nature, plants and leaves from tree to bush aren't all a uniform same green color, even though sometimes your logic tells you they would be. sometimes they're a little bit more blue, sometimes they're a little more purple, kind of weirdly. And so it's nice to kind of be mindful of that sort of variation. So I'll kind of go back and add in some of that variation in tone once this initial wash is done. Sorry about the bottom corner there. Let's see. Just trying to pivot a little bit. Yeah, this part's fun where I'm just kind of filling in localized color, not really doing shading just yet. That kind of comes in near the end, because it's basically just filling in a coloring book. Yes, it's a coloring book that I made and I drew, but it still kind of has that same vibe. Just shading in lines, nothing complicated. Keep the stuff in the background pretty light, because if it's too bold, it'll push too far into the foreground. I want to have like a good amount of depth to this painting. Otherwise, all the line work that I've done gets a little busy and it starts to feel a little like chaotic and crowded. So like this right here has gotten a little too bold, so I'll come in with a little bit of water to kind of spread out the pigment, make it recede a little bit. And it may be that when the painting nears finished, I'll decide that this bit in the back is too light. And it's always easy to go back in and add more pigment. It's easier to add color than to take color away. So you can see as I get near the top here, I'm starting to kind of leave gaps. That's kind of where the leaves end and where sunlight's kind of filtering through. Here, because I painted a bit I shouldn't have. If you can get watercolor when you've just laid it down, you can erase it a little bit by just kind of scrubbing water over it, but you have to be kind of quick, otherwise it sets and then you're kind of just have to live with whatever you just did. Luckily we're painting light right now, so no big deal. Like the paper is buckling too much right now, so I'm going to get rid of these books because they're a little in the way if we start kind of folding up again later. Bring it back. So you can see how much more loose I'm being with these like big wide open naturey spots than I was down with the other bits, with the fox and the girl. This is partially because it's bigger, wider areas of color, so you don't need to be as careful. But it's also partially because, it's like I was saying earlier, I kind of like to be a bit more loose and impressionistic the further you get away from the focal point. Because it kind of mimics what your eye does when you're looking at a thing, where you're focused on an object and that's in focus in high detail, and then everything around it kind of blurs. Yeah, so this is still kind of the coloring book phase. Once all the localized color is filled in, we'll go to shading. I'll talk a little bit more about the technique once we get to there, because the localized color bit goes pretty fast, especially when it's a painting like this where it's a pretty limited palette. It's mostly just kind of greens and yellows. Hey! My dad's on stream. Hi, Dad. My dad is also an artist. He's a landscape painter, so he would be able to paint what I'm doing much better than I can. Thanks for the nice words, Dad. Yeah, sorry again if I zone out, especially these kind of big wide open spaces where I'm just kind of filling in color. It's so easy just to kind of zone out. Lots of times when I'm working on graphic novels and books and things, I'll put on like a podcast or an audiobook, and I can kind of just tune out and just kind of enjoy the story and not really think too much about what I'm doing. I can't do that as much when I'm working on sketches or thinking through compositions, but once it gets to this stage, it's mostly just color, light, shape, things that I practice so much that it kind of becomes ingrained, so I don't really have to think about it when it comes time to put a piece together. I can kind of just go on autopilot. Let's see, let's pull back. Be leaving a little more gaps in these trees, but that's okay. Like I said, this is a pretty low stakes painting. It's not really for anything. It's just practice technique, have some fun, explore some mythological and like folklore concepts that I like. My husband and I are both kind of just hanging out at home. His job's kind of winding down a little bit. It says, you're doing great. I want to see those Prospect Park foliage sketches. I will have to post some more of those of the studies I've done in Prospect Park. There's a lot. I have about half a sketchbook full of just trees and plants and stuff. Some of it's watercolor, some of it's just like fountain pen or pencil sketches. Thank you so much. That's what we hope. That's what it looks like so far. I'm going to keep the color pretty light for now because I still want to introduce some variations in greens. But this is just kind of a base wash for it. But here's what it looks like so far. A lot of the way the foliage and the plant life is layered is specifically based on studies of an area of Prospect Park called the Vale of Kashmir, which is a very dramatic name, but it's basically this sunken garden in Prospect Park. It's got these little ringed tiers that just kind of go down and down and down. And back in the early part of the 1900s, it used to kind of just be where the rich and wealthy of Brooklyn would go hang out. It was just the kind of fancy pants part of the park. And then there was a hurricane, I think, if I remember the story right. And it kind of messed the place up, and people abandoned it and moved on to other places to hang out. And it just kind of got overgrown. Plants kind of took over, trees started growing in weird places. And they've kind of since gone back and kind of cleaned up the paths a little bit so you can get to it, but it's still this kind of weird, wild, overgrown thing that just kind of sinks into the park, and it's kind of hard to find unless you know where it is. And it's one of my favorite places just to go work and sketch and do studies, so a lot of this is kind of based on how that place looks. How's growing up with artist parents? Both my parents are mathematicians. Well, my dad, who's on chat, could probably speak to it a little bit more, but it was good. A lot of, there was just a lot of good paper and pencils just kind of around the house to doodle, which was very good for me growing up. I'm lucky in that a lot of kids, a lot of my peers have to spend a lot of time, like in comics and illustration, they have to spend a lot of time trying to explain to their parents what it is they do for a living and why people pay them for it. And I thankfully don't have to do any of that, because my dad kind of knows how that works. So mostly when my dad and I talk, it's to complain about, clients taking a long time in payment, or, how long a piece is taking, that kind of thing. Travel will cooperate. I'm planning on doing a trip with my parents and my husband to the south of France in a month. We'll see if the airlines will cooperate with us, but basically the plan was to go sketch castles for a week. We will see. In the meantime, it's good just to be here sketching bushes and weird fox statues. Is so fluffy. I like I said, I got out of the shower right before the stream, and I haven't really styled it at all, so it's just in my face. I'm blaming the hair that keeps getting in the paint on my dog, but it very well could also be me. Another part of the reason I'm doing these big flat washes of just sort of flat colors before adding in more detailing is because, the line work is very dense and specific, and I knew exactly what the lines were supposed to dictate when I drew them. Even I kind of lose track of where one object ends and the other begins, and so this is a way to kind of really firm up where this tree is versus that tree, where this bush is versus the stone wall behind it. So that when I go back in and add kind of more specific local color, that it's a little more specific. Yeah. The husband and the dog have returned. Mwah. The family's on the stream. Megan and Dad are on here. You can tell that we're all home and we've been home for like days.
Yeah.
My husband's just in the next room, basically playing video games and stress baking. And the dog is just going stir crazy. Megan, who is my younger sister, says it looks great. Have you read anything good lately? Thanks, Megs. I have. What am I reading right now? Right now, I just finished reading. Oh, what novel did I just finish? Shoot. See, now you've asked and I've completely forgotten. Nope, it's gone. The book I'm reading right now, I'm reading a graphic novel that just came out. I can actually show you on stream right here. Here, let me show you. It's called Snapdragon. I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful book. The cartooning is excellent. It's about a witch who helps roadkill. It's complicated. But it's a really beautiful book. I've really been enjoying it. Man, I wonder, what did I just finish reading? I just recently read The Night Country, which is the sequel to Melissa Albert's The Hazel Wood, which is kind of an urban dark fantasy. It's a series I've really enjoyed. I got to meet the author Melissa at the Winter Institute a couple years ago when I was promoting my first book. So it's great to be able to talk to her and then kind of get to read her work afterwards. What else? What else have I read? Next on deck, once I'm done with Snapdragon, I have The Unwilling by Kelly Braffett, who's another author I met in person recently. I got to chat with her at the launch party for Erin Morgenstern's The Starless Sea, which is another book that I've loved. So Kelly and I share a publicist, and they sent me a copy of her newest book, so I'm looking forward to reading that next. I'm actually supposed to be at Emerald City Comic Con right now. They canceled the event, which is why I'm here painting with you all. But The Unwilling was supposed to be my airplane read. Right, we are nearly finished. Let's switch to a smaller brush for some of these little smaller bits in here. Ooh, sorry, zoned out. Forgot you guys were watching. My dad's on here. You should stream some of your paintings sometime. If anyone wants to go look up my dad's stuff and buy his paintings, I don't know if he still maintains his website, but if you just search Brad Aldridge, he paints lovely landscape paintings that you can find for sale at the different galleries that represent his work. Does oils mostly. Good stuff. I had thought for the longest time I was going to go into fine art like him, but the more time went on, the more I realized I just wanted to draw dragons and trolls and stuff. And so book illustration just kind of ended up being a more natural fit. So similar, but different. So there's a lot of the localized color. I'm going to go in now and do some more specifics on the green bits, and then I'll add kind of a cool slate blue for the stone on the statue and the walls and stuff. I think I might actually leave the wall behind the statue more or less alone until we get to the shading bit, just so that when I paint the color on the statue itself, it kind of pops out a bit more. Actually, let's do tree trunks first before we get into greens. Let's see, what else do I have on my... I have a huge shelf that I keep next to my desk of like to read books. I either get my to read library from books from the library, or I buy them habitually. I've got the latest Hilda graphic novel from Luke Pearson on deck. I'm going to be reading the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin soon, which I've had highly recommended to me. I just finished a few weeks ago the audiobook for Robert McFarlane's Underland, which is a nonfiction book about underworld spaces in geography and history and mythology. It's beautifully written, very interesting. Talks about the catacombs under Paris and geological storage sites for nuclear waste and hollowed out mountains and ancient cave systems and all kinds of interesting stuff. His paintings are amazing. Oh my gosh. See that, Dad? Never say I don't promote my father's work. He promotes me all the time on his social media too, so. I think you can. I think his Instagram is Aldridge Fine Art. If you want to follow my dad's Insta, I know he posts some work in progress on there. So if seeing cool paintings get made is your thing, he's got some stuff for you. The painting's not buckling too bad now that initial wash is down. It's actually staying pretty flat, even though it's not bound in any way or stretched. That may change as time goes on, but so far we're doing okay. Yeah, it seems like everyone is just kind of at home. Everyone's just kind of taking a chill weekend. What was the title of that one again with the catacombs? It's Underland by Robert McFarlane. It's a beautifully written literary nonfiction. It's got an amazing cover. And I listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook is very masterfully narrated. So if audiobooks are your thing, I highly recommend that one. I've been kind of telling everyone about that. Another book that I've been recommending to everyone this last year is The Cathedral of Myth and Bone by Kat Howard. Kat is currently writing the Books of Magic comic series for Vertigo. And The Cathedral of Myth and Bone is a collection of her short stories. And I fell absolutely in love with it when I read it last year. She's a masterful writer. Her stories are very evocative, so I also highly recommend that book. Again, I'm keeping these colors pretty light for now because I don't want them to push too far forward, and then as I decide kind of what the foreground and background wants to do, I'll kind of push the saturation of each individual part. That'll kind of come nearer to the end of the painting, maybe even after the shading's done. This is just, like again, to kind of coloring book it out and see where everything sits. You mentioned before that you listen to podcasts while you draw. Are there any in particular that you'd recommend? Oh, that's a good one. Yes. What do I like to listen to? So, there's a bunch. There is a podcast that I believe you can find on SoundCloud called Folklore Fragments. It's run by the folks at I think it's the University of Culture Collective in Ireland. It's a university podcast. It's put on by a couple of their archivists, where they talk about folklore beliefs in mythology and music and cultural practices from around Ireland and broader Europe. And because it's the Folklore Collective that's putting it on, it's interspersed with actual audio bites they have in their collection of when they've gone out and interviewed people in the kind of more far-flung rural areas who have stories about seeing their grandma, trade with fairies, or who say they saw a neighbor get stolen by a troll, things like that. It's really fascinating to kind of hear the way those beliefs sort of persist, or the way they've kind of changed or adapted over time. I listen to Sawbones, which is a medical history podcast. It's really interesting, but I will warn you now that it's got a pretty significant gross out factor. It's put on by Dr. Sydney McElroy and her husband Justin. It's a comedy podcast-ish, but also sort of a historical one. Let's see, I missed a tree back here. In terms of fiction podcasts, I listen to Friends at the Table, which is an RPG live play show. I listen to The Adventure Zone, which is kind of the one that everyone listens to. It's a Dungeons and Dragons one. What else? I listen to Futility Closet, which is a husband and wife research team who share sort of quirky stories from history. I like historical stuff. I like fantasy. I like literature. Okay, so that's shaded in. Let's do some more specifics on the greenery. Yeah, podcasts I only kind of listen to in bursts. For the most part, I'm kind of an audiobook guy. Here, while we're waiting for that to dry up, let me re-up the stream on Twitter so that people know we're still going. Let's do one for Instagram, people who follow me there. This is the life of an artist on social media. Sorry. All right, that's done. Snack. Uh-oh. I lost a walnut down my apron. All right. Tommy says, have you read The Adventures Zone graphic novel? I just read book 2. I have read it. I'm actually good friends with Carrie Peach, the illustrator. She kind of organizes a regular breakfast for us freelancer types to kind of go and talk shop and socialize. People in my field tend to be kind of hermity, so it's nice to be able to have an excuse to get out, talk with some peers. So I see Carrie every couple of weeks at least. She's a great cartoonist. If you haven't checked out the Adventure Zone graphic novels, definitely do. Her character acting is amazing. Alright, let's do some more specific color. I think I want to keep the bushes a fairly vibrant green so that they kind of stand out against, like, kind of this yellowish green that I have going on here, so they stand out against the cool of the stone. So I'm going to start with just kind of laying in a more vibrant tone for a lot of that. Thanks for the shout out. You're welcome, Dad. Thanks for shouting me out all the time and also raising me. That's amazing. Who else goes? Well, I don't want to name drop. Some people like to do it secretly. People kind of come and go. Another regular is graphic novelist Wendy Xu, who just put out a graphic novel she co-created called Mooncakes. If you haven't read it, please do. It's very charming. She has another graphic novel that she is writing and illustrating that'll be out in next year, I believe, called Tide Song. Wendy and I actually kind of form a little bit of like a work critique group. So I've gotten to see some early passes at Tide Song, and you guys are going to love it when it comes out. There's a few other folks. I don't want to name drop too much. Some of these people like their privacy, but it's a nice little crew. It's nice to be able to go and kind of see what's what, and get a feel for what else is going on out in the industry. I don't want to go too flat. Mooncakes is wonderful and cute. It is wonderful and cute. Mooncakes is a great book. Everyone should buy it and read it. There's so many cool artists doing graphic novel work these days, and I'm such a huge fan of all of them. It's crazy that I get to be friends with some of these people. Oh, that's a good one. Another thing I'm reading, to go back to books I'm reading now, the main webcomic I'm currently reading is Barbarous by Yuko and Ananth. It's this amazing webcomic about it's a modern urban fantasy about a washed up wizard school dropout and a big bulky stressed out familiar, and it's charming and heartbreaking and funny, and I highly recommend it. Barbarous is the name of the webcomic. And it's another example of some cartoonists I'm friends with. Yuko and Ananth are lovely people. She drew a pigeon in my copy at C2E2. Yes. If you ever see Wendy at an event, ask her to draw a pigeon in your book, and she will draw the most glorious pigeons. She is obsessed with pigeons. Wendy, if you're watching this, you know it's true. If you're not, I'm telling you that the chat called you out. Barbarous is so good. Yeah, I'm in love with it. I'd fallen way behind. I'd read the first little bit, and then I kind of got distracted, and I'm a little inconsistent with webcomics. I'm a bit of a technological troglodyte, and I'm not super good at like keeping up on e-reader stuff. But I just got the time a few weeks back to catch up on everything I'd missed, and boy, it's good. deserve all the attention and awards they can possibly get. For that graphic novel I was showing earlier, Snapdragon, if that book doesn't win a bunch of awards, there is no justice in this world. It's an amazing story. I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm kind of reading it slow. Most graphic novels you can kind of carve through in an afternoon. I've been chipping away at this one slowly over the course of a week because I'm just so fascinated by what Kate can do with acting and layout and pacing. It's a really masterful comic. Alright, just come along. Okay. Alright, let's do some kind of more bluish greens. Mix up the colors over here. Here's how the palette's looking. Messy. Very messy. I'm not a very organized painter, I'm afraid. There's been such a great surge of graphic novels in the last decade or so, especially for the young adult and middle grade crowd. So many titles I wish I had as a kid. Yeah, it's really amazing. I didn't read a ton of comics as a kid, partially because there just wasn't the wealth of comics there is now. But my only exposure was really, reading Calvin and Hobbes, and my dad would occasionally pick up these great like vintage Batman comics or Spider-Man comics for me. When he was out traveling, he'd go into comic book shops and find me some great copies. And then I think me and my little brother kind of discovered Jeff Smith's Bone series around the same time, and that was kind of my first real graphic novel exposure. I was just blown away by them. And yeah, there's so many good ones now. It really is a great time, both as like a reader of comics and someone who's creating comics, to kind of see the breadth of the work and how interesting and experimental and boundary pushing a lot of it is. And it's a lot of fun to be kind of working in this atmosphere. Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes is a classic. Bone, too. If you haven't read the Bone series by Jeff Smith, it's really something else. Okay, I want to keep some things a little lighter. Back in the internet Wild West, where all you had were gamer webcomics and Sprite. Yeah, Yeah, I had some friends who were really into like the early days of webcomics, and I never really jumped on that bandwagon, and I kind of wish I had. There was some cool stuff being made that I kind of missed or came into after the fact. There's a lot of good stuff going on now. Webtoon's doing some interesting things if you're a webcomic person. Some good things all around. One of my particular obsessions is I love the French graphic novel market. There's a lot of comics over there that kind of work with watercolor comics the same way I do, and so I turn to a lot of artists from that market for inspiration. And there hasn't previously been a huge amount of crossover. They haven't really translated a lot of French comics into English and distributed in this market. That is starting to change. There's starting to be a few more. If you want some really great French comics that have come out in English, especially if you like the watercolor thing, Castle in the Stars by Alex Alice is a beautiful series, really amazing work, hugely inspiring to me. There's a book coming out from First Second, I think next month, called Kairos. I've admired the art for years. I have the French edition that I picked up last time I was in Paris, and it's coming out in English finally next month, so I'm looking forward to finally being able to read it. Sandman will always be near and dear to me. Started in high school and I was hooked. Yeah, Sandman's great. I didn't come to it until, I think I read the first volume of Sandman when I was in college. I knew none of its existence. There wasn't really anywhere for me to get it. But yeah, that one's a mind-blowing series. Some of Neil Gaiman's best work still, I think. So you can see how much more blue this is, but you can kind of see from here like how that creates a really believable variation in the greenery. It kind of gives the forest scenery some more life. It's a little more flat than I'd like. I'm going to go back with some water and kind of erase some highlights where the sun's hitting it later. Do like a lifting technique. I'll talk about that more as we get to it, I suppose. Sandman's great. What other graphic novel do I love? What's on my shelf? Boy, there's some good ones. If you like horror, Emily Carroll's Through the Woods is a collection of horror short stories in comic form. They're amazing. Molly Ostertag's Witch Boy trilogy. It's very charming and beautiful. There's a lot of good comics. My friend Trung is about to be releasing his YA graphic novel debut later this fall called The Magic Fish. I've seen some early past pages and it's beautiful, so people should pre-order that now. Break up the wall of monotonous green and kind of make it a little more interesting. Yeah, that's kind of giving it that nice, interesting variation in tone. It'll kind of pop more once we get into the trees in the background. Oh, I haven't read Genderqueer yet. It's on my list. I haven't really gotten too much yet into nonfiction comics, but there's been some great ones. The artwork, at least, is just beautiful. I need to get into reading them more. Mostly I've been sticking to fiction so far. But I just picked up a copy of Noelle Stevenson's new comic memoir. I think it's called The Fire Never Goes Out. And, that one's also on my shelf. Alright, what are we doing next? Do some of the trees. Do even more blue for that. Why not? hoping that the graphic novel I'm working on currently gets announced soon. When you're publishing, your publisher, and specifically Publishers Weekly, likes to announce first before the creator does, just so they can kind of have the big widespread announcement of it. And they haven't announced my current graphic novel yet, but I'm excited when they do, because I can't wait to talk about it with everybody. It's been a lot of fun to develop. Have you read the Summoner books by Taryn Martin? I have not. I'm behind on a lot of books. I fell behind in my reading a little bit this last year. No real reason. I just wasn't reading as habitually as I normally do. I'm trying to get back into it and catch up on all the books I've missed out on. There have been a lot. Let's see how that variation's starting to go. Hi, Aaron. Can I ask what paint colors you're using? Are you in terms of like the colors or just like the brand? I'm afraid I don't know the colors off the top of my head. There's different blues and greens, different variations. I'm mostly using Holbein watercolors right now, with a little bit of Winsor & Newton in there. Yeah, I admit I'm not typically very choosy about my materials in terms of like brand names. For the most part, I'm not using anything like spectacularly expensive or fancy. The exception to that is probably the pens I'm using. Again, they're not super expensive, but they're a little harder to get. For the ink work, a lot of times I use stuff like this, which is Manga G-Nib. They're a little hard to find in the US, but I get these at a Japanese import store that's here in New York. Japan, as a lot of you know, have a much more robust and thorough comics industry than the US does, and so they kind of have tools, like a market of tools that are kind of set up a bit more for that, for speed and precision and very lively drawing. And so I've been going to that shop a lot. It's in Manhattan. And I use it to kind of pick up some more specialized tools for doing traditional comics. But other than that, I use just a fairly inexpensive watercolor paper. It just kind of works well. It holds up well under a lot of washes, so that's what I just stick with. Not terribly choosy about paint. Holbein just kind of tends to have a texture I like. The ink I use is pretty consistent. I use one of these. It's an FW acrylic artist ink. I just use it because it's acrylic and it's waterproof, which means I can paint over it without the lines smearing. So I can kind of retain a nice, crisp, fresh drawing. Hey, Brittany. Good to at least see your name in the chat. I miss you too. Brittany is an old friend from high school. High school and college days. We haven't really seen each other since college. So glad you can chill out on the chat. I always use G-Pens. Yeah, you know, they're kind of great. I didn't use them for the first graphic novel, my first Estrange book, because I didn't know they existed. And then I discovered them just in time to work on the second one, The Changeling King, and it like completely changed how I draw. They're very flexible. So if you want specifics on how the G-Nibs work, they're a dip pen that has a lot of flex built into them, so you can get an almost brush-like line. and it makes a drawing way more lively and energetic. Let's see, I want this part of it. I'm kind of losing the specifics of this tree. I'm getting distracted. Not by you guys. I just kind of zoned out. But let's get some specifics back here. We don't want to just be totally random. We want some rhyme and reason to this. I think a little bit of a trap when you're drawing nature is because nature can seem so chaotic to kind of just scribble, go crazy, not really do any planning. But trees and stuff and plant life, they do follow certain patterns and logic. And so if you do it right, it will kind of affect that sort of seeming randomness of nature, but you can't just try to artificially do it, or otherwise you're going to naturally fall into the patterns of your own mind, and it will kind of come off as looking very artificial. So you kind of have to figure out that language. That's something my dad probably knows more about than I do. I mostly focus on character stuff. I've been, over the last few years as I work on comics and stuff, I've been focusing more on improving my environment work. But still a ways to go, I think. Alright. The work that I have hangs in my therapy office. It always brings up good things in session, so thank you. Oh, so nice. Thank you, Brittany. That's so nice to hear that you've got work in the office. I appreciate that. Alright, so here is how we look so far. Pretty good. I'm going to start laying in some of those slate grays on the stone, and then we'll get into shading. Probably take a little break after the flat colors. That's as I was just saying, you're right about how difficult randomness is. It really is. Like, you'd think that it would just be like a good cop-out in art where you're like, it's nature, you can just kind of go random with this bit. But I guess it's just because of how we're built as human beings. Your brain just naturally seeks patterns. So even if you're willfully trying to be random, it's amazing how often you just sort of end up creating your own artificial patterns. Like, it's really hard just to fake randomness. So like for a lot of these trees, and it's still not perfect, it's still something I'm working on, like even though these are trees in leaf, I also do lots of studies of trees in fall and winter so that I can see what the leaves are resting on. You kind of get the bones of the tree and kind of see what patterns that seeming randomness is being structured around. I'm trying to make something look random and natural, and before I know it, I've repeated my randomness in regular intervals. Yeah, I do the same thing. You just repeat yourself. It's just how the human mind works, apparently. Yeah, and so I tried to spend a lot of time this last year studying the sort of basis of that seeming randomness, seeing what patterns nature follows, and trying to kind of internalize that shape language so that I could kind of at least somewhat convincingly recreate it in my work from imagination. And I think we're doing okay. I'd buy this. All right, let's do those blues.
It was the first time. First that I was really scared.
I think for some of these bits where the sun dappling is happening, I don't want to do too much there because I kind of want to keep that warm glow, kind of patchy sunlight effect. I'm going to do it real light on the statue, and then otherwise it's going to be just kind of in fits and starts on a lot of the stone slabs and stuff. Mix up that blue. I use I mix kind of like a slate blue for this kind of stuff normally. Kind of a grayish blue. this real light.
That links Earth to the heavens. You can stay here alone and watch what happens to this purgatory.
Ooh. Whatever audio they're mixing in this song is ominous. I just have that like lo-fi like hip hop playlist that's on YouTube that everyone listens to while they're studying. It's just looping in the background. I don't know if I even want to do it this way. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Just really lightly. And then we'll deepen the shadows on the next pass. Do you read much manga? You know, I hadn't previously. I was not a big manga reader. Not for any real reason. I just never really got into it. I liked a lot of anime when I was a kid, and then I got out of it for a bit, and I'm kind of getting back into it now. There's some recent manga I've been reading that I've really loved. The main one is Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. And one, it's just a very charming story, but two, her pen and ink draftsmanship is like exactly the kind of work I like to make. And her draftsmanship just blows my mind. I love looking at her pen and ink line work. That's really the only one I'm keeping up with now. I was reading, what is it called? Samurai 9? The guy who wrote Naruto is doing a new kind of like sci-fi samurai comic on Shonen Jump that I've kind of read bits and pieces of that I've really liked. But I don't keep up on it as much as I probably should. Yeah, the art in that one's crazy. It's also very child-friendly, so if you've got kids who like fantasy, Witch Hat Atelier is the one to go to. It's a beautiful comic. Yeah, let's keep doing this. I'm gonna just do a full coating. I'm getting a little nervous about this because like I said, I'm trying some lighting effects here that I've never really done before, and I'm gonna switch water again. I'm not 100% sure I'm doing it correctly. Like I said at the top, a lot of the point of this painting is to experiment. A lot of my standalone illustrations are. It's going so well, I don't want to ruin it, but at the same time, if I don't experiment, then it kind of defeats the point of doing this. If I manage to go all the way through this painting without ruining it, once I get a clean scan of it, I'll put it up in my print shop for people to buy if they would like. If that's a thing you'd all be into. First, let's see if I can actually finish the painting without goofing up. So far, it's going pretty well, I think. Like I said, once these flat blues are laid in, I'm probably going to take a little 5-minute break. I'll leave the stream up and running, and then I'll keep the music going. And then I'll be back, and we'll finish this painting. But let's do these first. here's how that looks for now. So that's, oh wait, we forgot her jeans. One last little bit of localized color, and then we're actually done with the flat bits, and then move on to shading. But let's do her jeans. I always do this. There's always like some aspect of the painting that I forget. When I was doing my last graphic novel, The Changeling King, the mom in the story wears these like little red earrings, and I think I actually painted the red on the earrings like maybe 10 times and forgot to do it the whole rest of the book. And so when the art director went back through, it was like almost hundreds of notes being like, you missed it, you missed it, you missed it, you missed it here, please paint these red. You could kind of tell in the tone of the notes they were getting a little exasperated by the end. Oh, we're gonna want this a little darker so she pops a bit more. Let's see. I'm seeing all kinds of little things here that I missed though. So let's do this first. We want the little knickknacks to be painted in. Did you fix the earrings traditionally or digitally? Those I fixed digitally. It would have taken way too much time to go back in, paint in all the little red dots of the earrings, scan them, replace them into the template, letter them again. It would have just taken forever. So yeah, those ones were fixed digitally. There's some stuff like that where if it's like minor corrections, I'll do just in Photoshop or Clip Studio. How's that look? We need a little burnt sienna for that mug, I think. Alright, there we go. And we're going to do some red on her sneakers, and then I think that's it for the local color. So far, it's coming along pretty well. All right, let's take a 5-minute break. Everybody go drink some water, stretch, get a snack. I'll be back here in 5 minutes. In the meantime, I'll leave the video running. I'll leave the music running, so if you guys want to just chill. But I'm gonna go get some water and eat some leftover pizza real quick. So, be back in 5 minutes. All right. We're back. It started to buckle a little bit while I was away, so let's put these books back to flatten it. I really have to get painter's tape. I'll have to remember for next time. Hope everyone got some good snacks. Alright, make sure the stream is up and running. Everything looks good. Alright. Alright, let's get back to it. So from here, we are on to shading. This is the part that, for me, really kind of makes the drawing come alive. I like this kind of flat color look right here. There's something kind of Disney about it almost. But the shading is where it starts to kind of breathe, I think. So as always, I like to start work on the sensitive focal point bits. So that's the girl, the sort of slab of offerings, and the statue and the fox. The fox I'm going to do almost no shading on, the actual fox itself, because I want to keep that color bright and make it kind of glow. But the statue is going to need some shading. So let's mix up a good bunch of that kind of cool shadows. Because there's warm light coming in, you kind of want cool shadows to offset it. Let's do the girl first. Actually, I'm going to use kind of just a deeper brown tone so that her hair looks nice and vibrant. And that's all we're going to use for shadows for that. It's just kind of a deepening of its natural color. Any books for 13 and up that you would recommend? Oh my word, there's so many. There are a lot of good ones. Yes, so I'll recommend one, a series specifically that I think is wonderful and didn't get nearly the attention it deserved. It was the Thisbe the Stoop series by Zach Gorman. It was illustrated by Sam Bosma, who went on to do, or who did it while doing backgrounds for shows like Steven Universe. The illustrations are lovely. It's a story about a gameskeeper in a dungeon of monsters that she's in charge of kind of keeping it. So, like, you know, if in fantasy when you go into a dungeon and it's full of monsters and traps and stuff, she's the person in charge of making sure those monsters are like well fed and alive so that they can eat adventurers when they come in. And she discovers a conspiracy against the kingdom and has to team up with a snobby princess who's gotten lost in the dungeon. It's incredibly charming and well written and just fun and heartwarming. And Zach really created something really special that I feel like wasn't nearly talked about enough. So I would highly recommend those. Erica Anderson says hello. Erica Anderson is my big sister. Hi, Erica. Yeah, this is how you know everyone's having a slow weekend, because like my whole family is just like jumping on the stream. I live in a different state than my family, so it's good to have this because we almost never get to see each other in person. I only see my family like maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Or the first one, it's really cute. It reminds me a lot of Hilda. Yes, Hilda is another great series, by the way, for that crowd. Yeah, it's that same way, and like it's kind of a nice spectrum of well-written characters and female friendship in the kind of high fantasy atmosphere. It's really quite charming. So the Thisbe the Stoop is the name of the series. If you can't figure out how to spell Thisbe the Stoop, just search Zac Gorman, Z-A-C. I really highly recommend it. But yes, the Hilda comics are great. There's a wonderful Netflix adaptation of the series if you haven't seen it. What else? I'm trying to think what other ones I've enjoyed. There's obviously a lot of comics, and we've talked a little bit about those on the stream so far. I'm trying to think of what I've read. So those questions where whenever someone asks what you've read recently, you just instantly forget all the books you've read. I have to go back through my lists. But yes, definitely at least the Thisbe books. I really, really love them. So I'm going to do some of that patchy... I'm going to do some of that patchy light on her a little bit. Just to kind of show that the light is kind of playing off her. I'm also making the shadows on her kind of especially high contrast because, again, she's one of the focal points. And so you want... This is one of those things where it's not technically accurate to like how light works in real life. But when you're painting a narrative, sometimes it's good to use the medium itself. You know, it's not a photograph, it's a painting. So you can manipulate certain things like how high contrast or high saturation one object is than the other, and kind of use it to inform the audience of, you know, where the focus should be. So their gaze can kind of wander and take in all the details if they want, but they're always kind of pulled back to that central story. And so obviously we kind of have this large sort of environment where the story's kind of focused in the center here, but we want to kind of always draw the audience back to that. Thanks, Erica. I'm glad you're liking it. Just a nice little for fun painting to work on a long weekend. I figure everyone's feeling kind of stressed right now, and so I kind of did this to chill out and calm down, and I figured maybe watching it and having some chill out music going would also help other people to kind of tune out, not really listen to the endless stream of news, which I don't think is necessarily always healthy to be just sort of obsessed with. So give people an excuse to have something to tune into and tune out with. So I hope it's working. These shadows a little bit and add a little bit more detail to them, like a little more kind of speckly. Reference again. It's always good to keep reference on hand. either photographic or other people's painting techniques, kind of see how other artists solve the same visual problems you're doing. Like I said, I keep a lot of like French comics who do watercolor on hand. I'm very inspired by their technique. Let's see, where's the spread I'm looking for? There we go. We can kind of use the paint here, not even just to do shading, but to add kind of like sort of a nice subtle texture to it, kind of add some like a roughness to the stone. Texture is pretty important to me in drawing because like it kind of helps fool the viewer's brain into kind of being able to suss out sensory details, not just the overall look of the thing, but how it might feel, how it might sound. Kind of really helps the viewer to kind of be there in the image. I listened to Chris Riddell's Desert Island Comics today, and it's really interesting. Oh, I've not really read a lot of Chris Riddell's comics, actually. I love his illustration work. He's a British illustrator, for those who don't know. My little brother and I loved the Edge Chronicles when we were younger, that are illustrated by him. He's another big influence on my work. I really love his line work. We don't create very similar work, but I just like to look at it, and his the improvisation of his work I find very inspiring. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, so you can see, sorry, I just yelled out weirdly someone in the chat just so they were logging off. Yeah, you can see how that's kind of becoming more believable and more realistic as we kind of add in those shading details and the texture with the paint. Same with her. She might need a little more just to, now that I see the paint dry. Let's shade the fox statue. So I wanted to keep the statue kind of weather worn, so there are some details here I'm going to be kind of improvising with paint that weren't in the drawing. You can kind of see the bones of it like in the smile here, but I'm going to define it a little bit more with the paint. Now now that I can kind of get a little more light touch with the details. Noticed how the lighter inking on the brick wall gives it the look to streaming around the statue. It's really pretty. Thank you. Yes, that's kind of the idea. That's sort of what I'm experimenting with, as I wanted that kind of sun-dappled look. I want to push it a little further in the future. This was a pretty light example. And I'm going to still push it in this piece more. But something I'm playing with. But I'm glad it kind of comes off as that, 'cause that's kind of the idea. You can already see how like some of these details are getting filled in the shading, giving it a little bit more of that three-dimensional texture. So see how that looks? Where to kind of have a little bit more definition on the expression of the statue, kind of details there. Which, if you'll notice, even though it's supposed to be kind of the random shadow of the trees on his face, it's kind of sort of gently mimicking the coloring pattern on a fox's face to kind of really establish what kind of animal you're looking at here, at least in the statue. And hopefully the fox on top of its head kind of really drives home like, oh yes, you're looking at a fox statue, as opposed to like a wolf or something. This would be great as a jigsaw. Ooh, that'd be kind of fun. I know some illustrators who, as part of their offerings at like conventions and stuff, make like jigsaws of their paintings. That would be kind of fun to look into. Maybe I'll have to think about that. This would be crazy as a jigsaw puzzle. It would drive me nuts. Yeah, so I kind of like this idea of the story that we're setting up here. There's a lot of mystery in it, right? But there's enough clues that you can kind of tell that, you know, this creature is the object of some local folklore. You know, maybe there's stories that the high school kids tell about this fox spirit who will grant wishes or something. I love that kind of thing. Those kind of like weird bits of folkloric belief that kind of persist even in modern societies. We're just kind of drawn to that sort of thing as a species, apparently. Like in the context of the sort of story of this piece, like obviously this is like an ancient place and an old statue, but like was the statue meant to be worshipping like a supernatural entity, or was it just a cool fox statue and then someone also saw a fox living in the woods near it and that started up like a story among the locals? Like this is kind of how a lot of these like folklore cryptid stuff starts, and I just find all that very fascinating. And so a good thing about a lot of these sort of standalone illustrations is I get to kind of explore themes and ideas that I haven't explored in my book work yet. And maybe I'll explore it someday. But just for now, things that don't really have a story, just kind of general vague concepts that I like to kind of play with. And as the paint dries, you can see I can kind of go back in and kind of lay in some more texturing and visual interest in details and stuff. Some spotting on some like weather spotting on the statue. It's a little too dark. Yeah, even in my standalone illustration stuff like this, where there's not a specific story I've written that goes behind it, narrative in general is something I'm very interested in, and so almost all, even my just standalone paintings, try to evoke a story. They try to kind of encourage the audience to build a narrative around it. And I feel like in that way it kind of makes the paintings a little more interactive, because the audience is at least partially responsible for building the meaning of the piece. And I think that kind of interaction that kind of happens between a storyteller and a story listener is something that's very compelling. What breed is your dog? It's very cute. It's a Shiba Inu, which are very fox-like, which is good, because the drawing of this fox is based mostly on just a study I've done of my dog, who is very fox-looking, just sleeping on our couch. It's good to have easy reference. I wanted it to be kind of the animal and the statue to be reminiscent of trickster figures in mythology and folklore. And so when I was planning the piece, I made a list of animals that figure in trickster mythology. So foxes are one, but you also have coyotes and crows and spiders and raccoons and things that represent tricksters in mythology. But because I have a thing that looks fox-like that lives with me, for easy reference, a fox is what it ended up being. So here's how we're looking overall. So again, I'm rendering these bits a lot more tightly than I'll render the rest of this, but just to kind of keep the focus here. All right, let's see how we're doing. Do I need to do anything else on this bit right now? I really want to make sure that the statue pops out from the background. It needs to be very clear what the focal point is. Alright, so I think that's mostly it for the focus. I'm going to keep the small brush for right now because I want to go ahead and do shading on like the brickwork on the wall. For the most part, I'm not going to keep that wash because I like those light spots that kind of highlight the fox's face. But I do need a little shading on the brick, so we're going to keep this pretty light because we don't want it to push too far forward. We still want these bricks to kind of remain in the background. We want to give it some of that life and texture that the rest of the painting has. You can see little green bits in here that I still have to kind of go in and paint green that I missed the first time around. There's a lot of that little stuff, just seeing things that I forgot about and going back and correcting it when it's all done. Hi Tobias. How's it going? Yeah, like I said earlier, a lot of my book work starts this way. Just like little visual ideas or paintings or notes in my sketchbook. I'm a visual thinker, so before I write anything, it usually starts like this, with like a single image or a collection of images. The book that I still can't talk about that I'm working on right now was from a single painting in my sketchbook that kind of triggered an idea. I'm working on a prose novel that was based on a painting that I've done. Estranged was built from a series of unrelated sketches in my notebooks that kind of just all gelled together at one point. It's kind of important to me to kind of keep up, like kind of feeding that visual well, where I don't necessarily have the structure of a book or a comic or anything that needs certain constraints placed on it. It's good to just kind of have paintings like these where I can just kind of improvise and experiment and kind of let my creativity flow. What picture is that of? It's not anything specific. It's just a standalone image painting I'm working on just for fun, just to enjoy a chill weekend. That's about as much as we're going to render that wall. Like, we're not going to go too much on it. We're going to do this one next. I want this pillar to be a little darker, because right now you see how this pillar is kind of blending into the wall. It's not really clear that it's further in the foreground. So we're going to make it a little bit darker, a little higher contrast, just to really drive that point home. That you watched when you were younger? Oh, I'm in the same ones of everyone in my generation. I loved Pokemon. I loved Digimon. Yu-Gi-Oh, that kind of thing. A lot of like Shonen Jump stuff. I don't watch too much of that stuff now. Let's see, what recent anime have I watched? I watched Little Witch Academia, which I adored. Very charming show. What else? The Ancient Mage's Bride, which is like a sort of Japanese take on like British and Welsh folklore, which was pretty cool. That was sort of fun to watch. I still don't watch as much anime as like a lot of my peers do. Not for any reason. To be honest, I mostly just kind of have a hard time keeping up on TV shows in general. I can't really do like binging, which is kind of how like serial media is structured to be consumed now. I just get restless and bored, and I want to go off and do something. I can only watch like an episode or two of a thing at a time before I want to go out and run errands or draw or write or ride my bike somewhere or something. But yeah, when I was younger, lots of Shonen Jump stuff. So Tobias asks, what's the Fox's story? Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit earlier in the stream. It's not really a specific story, but it's kind of supposed to suggest like kind of one of those local folklore things where maybe the local teens have decided that it's this kind of trickster fox spirit that will grant wishes if you bring it an offering it likes or something. It's kind of one of those, it's kind of evoking that like local superstition vibe that I think is kind of fascinating. liking so far? Not bad, I don't think. With the whole trickster aspect, I wonder if the wishes work as a monkey's paw, like there's always some kind of downside. You know, if I were to write a story based on this, it would definitely be like a monkey's paw situation. I like, I'm really drawn to like trickster folktales and mythology because I like that they always have that flavor of getting more than you bargained for. And I like that kind of element of chaos to it. Maybe not as like sinister and awful as the monkey's paw, which is a pretty extreme example of what I'm talking about. But yeah, definitely the kind of thing where there's an unexpected drawback, or it adds, maybe the fulfilling of the wish complicates things more than it solves them. I talked about it a little bit on stream yesterday, but in mythology, trickster deities are always very interesting because they are chaotic. It's dangerous to attract their attention, or considered dangerous to attract their attention. But at the same time, they still had worshippers and followers because, you know, they oversaw different aspects. Trickster deities were often also deities of travel and crossroads. The monkey's paw, but mostly just real annoying. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so tricksters were also kind of the gods of travel often, and so if you were going on a long journey, you would want to start by making an offering to a trickster deity, or in a lot of cases, Native American folklore has a lot of good examples of this. Trickster figures are also creator figures. Lots of times the beings who are responsible for the creation of the world or the creation of humans are also like that pantheon's trickster deity. And so even though they were chaotic and it was considered risky to kind of court their favor, it was still something you wanted to do on occasion. But that would make the whole thing more attractive for teenagers. Yeah, that's the kind of thinking I had in mind, where if what we're setting up here is a modern trickster myth, you know, what sort of people would appeal to that kind of power? And teenagers who are confused, who are maybe desperate for something to change, who just want change in general, I think that they would have a very natural appeal to teenagers. And so that was kind of the idea here, that it's like kind of like a local, like high school teen legend. Do you stream anywhere other than YouTube? Nope, so far just for YouTube. I might get into Twitch at some point, but I haven't really figured out the system yet, so. I love that she's presenting a book to the fox. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about it, how the kind of what's being suggested here is that people offer items of value, and not necessarily monetary value, but things that are important to them. So in my head, what she's offering, and I think the viewer can kind of develop their own kind of headcanon. But in my head, what she's offering is a beloved edition of a childhood book, something that she has a lot of emotional value to and that she will miss giving up. But whatever she's asking for, she thinks is worth it. This stuff reminding me of a painting I got all sketched up months ago and have yet to actually paint it. You should paint it. It seems like almost everyone's kind of shut in at home right now, so if ever there was a time, it's probably now. I have a feeling we're all about to have a lot more free time on our hands. Her first fanfic. It could be. It could be indeed. It could be the first fanfic she ever wrote. I actually know a lot of people who have, like, you know, their original, like, Gargoyles fanfiction in a binder that they keep and they've carried with them their entire adulthood, or, you know, Sonic fanfiction or whatever. Got to leave. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one. I already made it work from home, so I have exactly as much as I usually do. Yeah, same here. production on book stuff has slowed down a little bit because like my publishers, I think, has closed their offices. Most of the people who publish my books are working from home right now. So I've got a little more time to work on stuff like this. Just kind of standalone for fun paintings. I'm going to go ahead and do all the shading on the brickwork across the painting. So we got the statue and the bricks done. I'm going to do, so the slab is done. I'm going to do the brickwork at her feet and then over here, and then we're going to move on to the trees. And then I'm just going to kind of reinforce the sun dappling effect, and then that will be pretty much it. So let's do the slab. Let's mix up some more shading paint because we're running a little low. Probably gonna have to go. I gotta walk the dog pretty soon in about 20 minutes, just so you all know. So we'll work on this for 20 more minutes, and then that'll probably be it for the stream for the day. Once I finish up this painting, I will scan it. I will probably have it up online, just so everyone can see the final either tomorrow or Tuesday. And like I said earlier, if it turns out well, I'm happy with it, then I'll also upload it into my online print shop, which you can find a link through my website. So if you guys want a copy of it, you can. But we'll see how it turns out first. Work on these stones. We can at least finish the stones on the stream, I think. Is the fox's personality similar to Loki? It could be. A lot of tricksters, a lot across different myths have different motivations. Loki's an example of a trickster who's a little more actively malicious, but even then, not always. He gets his fellow gods out of trouble as often as he gets it into him, and there's an entire saga in Norse myth where there is a goddess who is depressed and he pulls a bunch of stunts to just to make her laugh. Not for any romantic reason or selfish reason, he just wants to make her laugh. So, could be. Helpful dog spirit that barks whatever problem you present it. Oh, thank you for the donation. You guys all just saw that. We have a button on for Ko-Fi that if you guys like to leave tips, they are very much appreciated. I just had a convention cancel, so we're a little tight on funds, so all the tips are appreciated. So you can see I'm continuing to kind of lay in texture here on the stone, so it gives it even more dimension and texture than what the ink drawing suggested. Fox is probably a little more like Anansi than Loki, not necessarily malevolent, but not your friend either. Yeah, tricksters in general are things you wouldn't necessarily want to consider your friend, but they're not always evil per se. Though again, Loki wasn't always necessarily malevolent either. The thing about tricksters is they're supposed to be kind of down the middle of the road morality-wise. They don't really represent one thing or the other. They're just chaotic. In a classical sense, they were kind of meant to represent a necessary disruption of order. To kind of remind higher-ups that they too were kind of subject to the whims of fate, just like anyone else. I think that's kind of important for society. It's good to have figures like that. There's something of kind of like an everyman hero in a lot of trickster myths. You know, something about, because a lot of it is just like about breaking the status quo, disrupting perceived chains of authority, flaunting that kind of stuff. I think it's important. It's good to have those kind of reminders in society. We live in a much more structured society now, so the kind of relevance of well, not the relevance, but the prevalence of those kind of figures, I think, has faded a bit, but they still exist. Mostly in the forms of cartoons, you know, like Bugs Bunny is a pretty good modern example of a trickster figure, where he's not good, he's not bad, he just serves to kind of disrupt social norms. Yeah, Shakespeare's fools. I mean, the concept of like court fools in general were this. They were the one person in the kingdom who it was okay just to fully, for like a medieval court jester, it was okay for them just to fully make fun of the king to his face, and that was like an enshrined social structure. It helped the king in a lot of ways because it made rulers seem more relatable. Like, aha, see, I too get made fun of. But also was kind of put it there to kind of remind the king, like, you know, you're no different. It was a thing we used to put a lot more emphasis on, and now it's mostly cartoons that kind of keep those figures, and that's a good way. It's just the way things shift in society. Good, I think. See how like that sun dappled effect is kind of working on the stones there? I'm going to kind of re-emphasize it in some bits, like towards the end of the painting. Alright, I'm going to do the stone floor, and then we'll probably wrap up the stream. How often will we be doing videos? You know, I stream on and off. I don't really have like a set schedule to it yet. This was just kind of a standalone painting, so no plans as of now. If I'm working on something that I'm allowed to share, because some of the paintings I'm working on now is, again, for my book that hasn't been announced yet, so I'm limited in how much I can share from it. But if I have a thing to share and it pops up, I'll stream. And then once the book is announced, I can stream a bit more regularly, as I'm working on pages that don't have too many spoilers on them. As always, you know, I'll leave this video up for a little bit, and then the video on demand will be available for all patrons on my Patreon. But I like to keep the stream itself public, just to help kind of have a little bit bigger of a crowd and let people kind of see what I'm working on. Where is the statue located? In my mind, it's kind of deep in the woods, like at the edge of town. You know, it's like kind of a small town folktale vibe. So maybe if you walk like, you know, 20-30 minutes into the woods behind the high school or whatever, there's these old ruins. I'd imagine the local kids all have all kinds of ghost stories and folk tales about the whole place. Okay, I think that'll about do it. I gotta go take care of this dog. I'm pretty happy with how that's coming out so far. So that's where we look. So from here, all I gotta do is doing the shading on all the bushes and trees and stuff, and then kind of unify some of the shadows that have already been laid down. And then once that's done, I'll scan it, adjust it so the colors on the scan match the colors I can see on the painting here, and then upload it. But thank you guys so much for hanging out in the stream. It was a good, long one, and I appreciate the company and you guys and all your great questions, and for the donations on Ko-Fi. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the support. I appreciate you guys keeping me on task and cruising through this painting. But thank you so much. Hopefully I'll do another one of these in the near future. And keep an eye out for the painting soon. Thank you guys. Have a good day. Everyone stay safe out there. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye.